colleagues, depending on where you are from. Welcome to today's webinar titled 3D Printing, Revolutionizing Drug Fabrication. We look forward to engaging and informative session today. My name is Aysu Selçuk. I am Development Goal Lead at International Pharmaceutical Federation, FIP. I will be facilitating today's webinar. I am joined with my colleague in the background, Albayna Labib, who is Exhibition and Digital Events Coordinator. Thank you those joining us live and to those listening it afterwards. I hope you will have an insightful webinar. So before we begin today's webinar, I would like to share some housekeeping information. This webinar is recorded and live streamed via YouTube. The recording will be available on our website www.events.fip.org. You may ask questions using the question box provided, and you are welcome to provide feedback to webinars@fip.org. If you would like to become an FIP member, you may visit our website www.fip.org/membership registration. So it is here in the slide. So please feel free to visit our website. Now, I would also like to share a new translation feature in Zoom. For this, please turn on captions, enable the translation toggle, choose the preferred language under my caption language. Now you can follow along with live translate captions. So these three images in the slides will be useful to activate this new feature. I hope it will be helpful and you will have a useful and fruitful webinar today. So to highlight that webinar is also strongly links with FIP Development Goals 20, which is digital health, and it is informed and overseen by FIP Technology Advisory Group. Therefore, this event is organized by FIP Technology Advisory Group. So like all development goals, Development Goal 20 is made up of workforce, education, practice, and science elements. And these elements aims to digital transformation within the pharmacy workforce and effective process to facilitate the development of digitally literate pharmaceutical workforce and to develop and deliver quality digital health and pharmaceutical care services through the digital literacy and utilization of technology and digital enablers, configuration on responsive digital services to widen access and equity, and also application of digital technology in healthcare delivery and development of innovative medical products. So it is my pleasure to give the floor to the webinar chair, Dr. Fereshteh Shokri. She is a member of the FIP Technology Advisory Group and Senior Industry Pharmacist, holding Doctor of Pharmacy degree and also a doctorate in a business administration. She is specialized in 3D printing. Now the floor is yours, Fereshteh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Aysu. Hello, everyone, and warm greetings to all our participants joining from different corners of the world. A heartfelt welcome to each of you. I'm Fereshteh Shokri from the Technology Advisory Group in FIP, and together with the FIP team, we will be your host for today's webinar on 3D drug printing, revolutionizing drug fabrication. And next slide, please. Today, we have an exciting agenda lined up for the webinar. I will be presenting 3D drug printing, revolutionizing drug fabrication, basic principles and applications. Following that, Professor Simon Geisfert will explore the role of machine learning and artificial intelligence in pharmaceutical 3D printing. Last but not least, Dr. Anna Worsley will discuss how software can enhance pharmaceutical 3D printing workflows, AI and beyond. There will be some time for questions at the end of the series, so feel free to use the chat box to share your thoughts and questions. Next slide, please. Here you see the learning goals. We will explore the fundamentals of 3D drug printing technology and advanced additive manufacturing technique for producing customized medications. We will identify key regulatory consideration in 3D drug printing and describe how artificial intelligence is leveraged in this field. We will also discuss how scientists are applying this knowledge to real-world scenarios and share key insights into its potential. Next slide, please. So we have 3 panelists today, and I have the honor to introduce them in greater detail before they begin their presentations. Let's get started with the first talk, which will be presented by me. Next slide, please. Today, I am delighted to present on the topic of 3D drug printing and explore its foundational principles and applications. Next slide, please. Over the years, 3D printing has revolutionized various fields, such as engineering and medicine. In the medical domain, it has been used in a wide range of areas, including in medical education. Doctors use 3D printed models of organs for surgical practice. In medical implants and prosthetics, custom-fitted implants, for example, hip and dental. 3D printers have been used in tissue engineering, bioprinting of tissues and organs, which could one day address organ shortages. And of course, 3D printing is applied to the field of pharmacy. Today, I want to focus on the application of 3D printing technology in the pharmaceutical field and see how 3D drug printing works in the drug fabrication process. Next slide, please. So how 3D drug printing works? We have multiple techniques for drug fabrication, and I highlight 2 commonly used methods. The first is the layering technique, which deposits drug components in successive layers to build up the final product. Each layer may include different drugs or excipients. And this layered approach ensures accurate dosing and structural integrity throughout the process. As you can see in the picture on top, this is a 3D printer which can build up 3D printed tablets layer by layer. The second, I would call the smart filling technique, which is a new capability of 3D drug printers, filling tablet blisters, capsules, or other types of packaging. As you can see in the film below, this is a 3D printer, which is filling tablet blisters. This technique helps eliminate the traditional capsule filling process commonly used in the compounding pharmacies, which exposes pharmacies to drug dust. Additionally, it makes the process faster and more efficient. Next slide, please. So, what does 3D drug printing offer to the field of industry pharmacy? 3D printing offers flexibility in dosage form and structure, which enable the fabrication of tablets in various shapes and sizes, films that dissolve quickly in the mouth, and capsules with multiple compartments for delayed or targeted release. A second aim could be to have innovation in the design of tablets by introducing complex geometries that would not be possible with traditional drug manufacturing, such as hollow or prose structure for sustained release. We can also easily design drug delivery systems that can control the release of active ingredients over time. This can improve therapeutic efficacy and minimize side effects by providing a sustained release of medication. A third capability that 3D printing offers is the rapid prototyping of new drug formulations. Researchers can quickly create and test new drug formulations using 3D printing technology. This allows for faster iteration and optimization of drug designs, ultimately speeding up the drug development process. 3D printing can also be used to produce placebo or active formulations for clinical trials, allowing for the rapid provision of test medications in a controlled and consistent manner, which is critical for research purposes. Finally, we can have on-demand production of medications in community pharmacies and hospitals, reducing reliance on large-scale manufacturing. This approach shortens lead times for new drug and minimize excess inventory. Pharmacies can print a specific prescription as needed, avoiding stock shortages and reducing waste from unused medications. Additionally, patients can receive fresher medications as drugs are produced only what's required, lowering the risk of expired stock. Next slide, please. Let's look at what 3D drug printing can offer to clinics. We can make personalized medicine. 3D printing allows for the creation of medications tailored to individual patient profiles, considering factors such as weight, age, and disease state. Secondly, with this technology, we can customize doses tailored to children and elderly patients who often require smaller or easier to consume doses. Many papers have shown that the effectiveness and safety of drug dosing cannot simply be extrapolated from adult clinical trials. So every child needs a specific dosage. This includes the option to print medications in desired flavors and shapes to improve adherence. In the elderly group, and patients with multiple chronic conditions, we often have less compliance because of medication burden. 3D printing can create a single polypharmacy pill that contains a combination of several drugs. This simplifies medication regimens, reduces the pill burden, and improves patient compliance. Finally, 3D printing allows for precise control over the amount of APIs in each dosage form. This reduces the risk of side effects associated with over or underdosing. For example, in the case of antidepressant and antipsychotic medications, which need to be tapered down during treatment. Next slide, please. What are the promises of 3D drug printing for public health and the health economy? Of course, 3D drug printing improves public health through personalization, but the health system will also benefit from a reduction in financial burdens. Cost effectiveness will be significantly increased due to lower cost of producing small custom batches compared to traditional manufacturing methods, and also elimination of overproduction. Print only what is needed, which leads to reduced waste and inventory cost. Furthermore, supply chain will be simplified due to decentralized production. This has the potential for local production, reducing the need for extensive distribution networks, and also because of rapid response to patient needs. We can have on-site production in pharmacies or hospitals, can improve access to essential medications. Next slide, please. Yeah. Let's look at a few successful cases. You may have heard of Spriton, the first FDA-approved 3D printed drug, launched in 2015 and developed by Aprecia Pharmaceuticals. It is an anti-epileptic medication for the treatment of partial onset seizures in adults and children. It is worth noting its innovative zip dose technology, which facilitates the tablet's rapid disintegration in water, making it easier to ingest, particularly for individuals with swallowing difficulties. This ease of use has contributed to improved patient compliance. Another 3D printed drug that received investigational new drug clearance from the FDA is a T22 gastric retention product produced by Fereshteh company. Another example, which I would like to highlight, is a polypharmacy tablet. For the first time, Professor Geisfert and his team successfully modified a commercial stereolithographic 3D printer to enable multi-resin printing for the fabrication of tailored polypills containing 6 different active ingredients. Using this technique, they produce various polypill geometries with differing drug release profiles. Next slide, please. Let's explore the promising future that lies ahead for this innovative approach to healthcare. Number one is expansion of drug libraries for 3D printing. Researchers are actively developing a broader range of API formulations that can be used in 3D printing, and also new formulations are being explored to enhance solubility, bioavailability, and stability in printed medications. Moreover, we have to improve our quality standard, ensuring uniformity in the properties of printed drugs. For example, dosage, release profile can be difficult due to variation in the printing process. Another main challenge is stability and shelf life. Maintaining the stability of printed formulations can be complex, as 3D printed drugs may have different physical and chemical properties compared to traditionally manufactured drugs. And also ensuring adequate shelf life for 3D printed medications is crucial, particularly in terms of degradation and efficacy over time. Another significant trend, which seems to be gaining considerable attention these days, is the integration of 3D drug printing technology with artificial intelligence and machine learning. The application of AI and machine learning algorithms can optimize the design and production processes. These technologies can help in predicting the most effective drug formulations and printing parameters, improving both efficacy and outcomes. I am sure we will hear more about this in Professor Geisfert and Dr. Worsley lectures. Next slide. In addition to R&D work, the 3D drug printing community should be aligned with other agencies. For example, there is a lack of established frameworks. Regulatory agencies like the FDA are still developing guidelines specifically for 3D printed medications. And also the variability among printers and differences in printing protocols present challenges for traditional drug approval pathways. Another important point is making 3D printing process more sustainable and environmentally friendly. Innovations aim to reduce material waste and energy consumptions during the manufacturing process. Finally, I want to emphasize the importance of education, as this technology is now coming to the market and will be increasingly used in community pharmacies and hospitals. There is a need for training the new generation of pharmacists as well as active pharmacists globally with the required know-how and technical expertise. Thank you for your attention. I would now like to open the floor for the next speaker, Professor Simon Geisfert. Please let me give a short biography of Professor Geisfert. Professor Simon Geisfert holds a chair in pharmaceutics and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. Professor Geisfert has pioneered the development and application of 3D printing in medicine design, function, and delivery, exploring how various types of 3D printing technology can be exploited to revolutionize and personalize healthcare. He is also a world leader in the physical characterization of medicines. He has published 233 papers, 8 book chapters, and 4 books, including Essential of Pharmaceutical Pre-Formulation. He's a contributor to Alton's Pharmaceutics and was Pharmaceutics editor for 2020 edition of Remington's Pharmaceutical Sciences. He launched an educational YouTube channel, Pharma Drama, with the aim of helping students. I am not a student anymore, but I am a big fan of Pharma Drama YouTube channel. He has been named a highly cited researcher by Clarivate Analytics for 5 years in the period of 2019 to 2023. Professor Geisford, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fereshteh. That's very nice of you. If anyone's wondering why that picture that's on the screen doesn't actually look very much like me, the answer is that was actually generated by AI, which I think is very appropriate given the topic of the talk we're about to look at. Yeah, very scary. You just put in 10 photographs of yourself and it produces these business-like photographs. But anyway, we're not talking about that. We are, in fact, talking about 3D printing. So next slide, please, Isu. Thank you very much. Oh, and next slide again. That'll be excellent. Right, what are we going to do? We are going to look at artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I need to tell you exactly what they are so that you're clear about the difference between them. And then I'm going to look at one example of each type of technology applied to 3D printing. So you get a feel for how we have been using the technology to help us develop printed medicines. I'm going to look at how we have used machine learning with FDM printing, and we're going to use artificial intelligence with SLS printing. And then I'm going to wrap up with some wider issues that you might want to think about when it comes to using this type of technology. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the absolute basics, which is what I do on the YouTube channel, actually, and we're coming back to that at the end, so don't worry about it. On the screen is a typical molecule that we might have developed 100 years ago, which is paracetamol. We would do something along the lines of basic characterization, so maybe melting point, solubility in log P. We'd probably try and crystallize it from solution, and we would end up with a white powder. And then from those numbers, we have to turn that drug substance into a formulated drug product, in this case, some caplets. And next slide, please. To do that, we have to add a lot of excipients to make the final caplet. A typical product like that may have 15, 16, 17 different excipients. And then the list of excipients you can choose from is absolutely enormous. So it's not an easy task to go through and choose which are the best excipients for each drug substance. And really, that is the key theme that I'm trying to get to here. We can bring in AI and machine learning techniques, and we can use them to look at the process of medicine's development. And in that way, we can make better products quicker with fewer excipients. Okay, that's my overarching theme. Next slide, please. So what are AI and ML? It would be helpful to understand. Artificial intelligence is really a way of interacting with computers through human conversation, okay? And the computer is trying to mimic human thought. So you should be able to converse with an AI system and you believe that you're talking with another human. And the system is really going out to the internet and looking at all the data that are publicly available and drawing conclusions from those data when it's providing you an answer. I'm going to come back to a very important point about that as we finish the lecture. You've probably noticed, but only yesterday, with the launch of DeepSeek, which is a competitor to ChatGPT, for instance, just because DeepSeek is able to interrogate data with less computing power than ChatGPT, that wiped over $500 billion off of the share price of NVIDIA on Monday. So this is big stuff, and the sort of technology we're talking about and the impact it may have on society is astronomically huge. So just hold that in your mind. But what it does do, it allows someone to think creatively about a situation. I like sitting in my office and bouncing ideas off someone, That's how I get science done. And this is another way of doing it. But now it's allowing you to talk with the computer. And we've done all sorts of things trying to explore how we might use AI in developing better medicines. The other one is machine learning. So machine learning is a little bit simpler. It's essentially an algorithm, so a set of code that a computer is using to interrogate data. So machine learning tends to lend itself better to large data sets. That's important. If you think about any country's national health service, for instance, you've got huge numbers of data for the population. No one physician can look at those data and draw some sort of sensible conclusion. But a machine learning algorithm, on the other hand, can look at all of those data and pick out trends that a human may not see. And so that's the sort of areas we might be applying this type of technology to digital healthcare. Next slide, please. Yes, what does that mean? It means clearly there are loads of roles for AI and machine learning in pharmaceutical development. Some that I can think of off the top of my head: selecting excipients ahead of time without actually having to make a whole series of formulations and seeing which one's best and which one doesn't work. And we have a big research group at the School of Pharmacy in London who are developing virtual medicines and virtual laboratories. And so we are moving away from students actually doing tableting practicals, for instance. They just interact with experiments and machines in a virtual environment. That's kind of cool. And also, I noted this already, healthcare is becoming increasingly digital. Anyone that wears a smartwatch, for instance, that watch is recording health data all the time. And we just have this huge number of health data. Really, a really good application for machine learning and AI is in interrogating those data. You can imagine, for instance, the next generation of Apple Watch will have some sort of intelligence to it where it can monitor, say, your heartbeat, and it will notice if there's something irregular going on, that sort of thing. We, on the other hand, have kept it simple, and that's my motto in life: keep it simple. And so we've been looking at how we can apply AI and ML to 3D printing. So one example of each, and then we'll wrap up. So next slide, please. So I'll start with fused filament printing. If you're not familiar with what it is, it's the most common type of printer that you probably have at home. It's also the first printer that we bought in the labs at UCL back in 2012. The reason we bought that printer is because I read about it in the newspaper on the train on the way to work, and it said, US company launches printer that can print any object. And I thought, well, that's very cool, isn't it? So I got in, immediately bought one. It is the version that's on the screen. It's a MakerBot. The way that works, if you're not familiar with it, your feedstock material is a thin polymer filament. In this instance, the printer can take 2 of those filaments. The filaments are fed into the print head. The print head really is nothing more than a motor and a heater. So it heats the polymer filament until it melts, and then the motor drives the molten polymer out of a nozzle at the bottom, and the nozzle deposits polymer onto a build plate. And so if you want to build an object, let's say a tablet, you've got to layer it layer by layer. Each layer of your tablet is going to be a circle. So the printer will print your object layer by layer. The first layer will therefore be a circle on the build plate. Then the build plate moves down and the next layer is deposited, and so on. Your tablet is built up layer by layer. Very clever. Next slide, please. This type of printing is really handy for the pharmaceutical industry because the filaments are made with hot melt extrusion, and the pharmaceutical industry already uses hot melt extrusion for all sorts of things. So right there, you're not asking the pharmaceutical industry to try and adopt a new technology. They already use it. All you've got to do is convince them that on the end of the hot melt extruder, you need to put a printer. That's your only job for the pharmaceutical industry. So that's really good. It also means the filaments can be drug loaded really easily. So you put polymer and drug powder together into the hot melt extruder, and hot melt extruders work by heat and pressure and mix those materials together before extruding the filament. So drug loading is absolutely simple. Also, because they're already used by the pharmaceutical industry, they're generally easy to make GMP compliant. Anyone that tries to make stuff GMP compliant will argue with my use of the word easy, but nonetheless, it's not a huge challenge to make these filaments under GMP conditions, so that's also good. One negative, though, is we can't take polymer filaments from 3D printing suppliers and make medicines because those polymers are typically ABS, PVA, PLA, things like that. ABS is what's used to make Lego bricks. And I don't know about you, and don't try this at home, but if you've ever swallowed a Lego brick, I can tell you it will come out the other end a few days later looking very similar to how it went in. So ABS is not the sort of polymer we need to be printing pharmaceutical products with. We need to print with polymers that are generally regarded as safe, or GRAS polymers. So the types of things that the FDA doesn't mind. So next slide, please. That was the first thing that the research group started to do. How can we extrude our own GRAS filaments and print them? So on the left, on the screen, you can see 3 different filaments chosen at random from the ones that the students have made. On the left, there's one in small pieces, very much like spaghetti. That's not good. It's too brittle to handle. As soon as you try and bend it, it just snaps. On the right is a filament that looks absolutely excellent. It's got the right mechanical properties. It's not too bendy, but it's not too brittle. That's great. And in the middle is a filament that is too bendy. So you can almost have a filament that's too floppy. So you don't want something too brittle. You don't want too floppy. You want something right in the middle. But even if you do that, and I should say that all of those were extruded with HPMC AS, which is a fantastic pharmaceutical grade polymer, you still don't know if the filament is going to print or not. The filament can look fantastic, but that doesn't mean it's going to go through the printer, and we block the printer nozzles on a regular basis. On the rare occasion that we actually get something to print, we can print tablets, and they look like the ones on the right. They're all made with HPMC AS. They are 3 different grades of HPMC AS. LG means low grade, MG medium grade, HG means high grade, and they're just different molecular weight polymers, and that changes the rate at which the drug is released from those tablets. We are not getting into the world of personalized medicines today, but if we ever do, that is how we change the release rates from our drugs, by changing the molecular weight of the polymer, amongst other things. What we did do, however, is that the students over a number of years made an enormous number of filaments. And so we had this data set where the students had lots of filaments of different formulations. They knew how they extruded, and they knew how they printed. And so what we decided to do was use machine learning to interrogate all of those data and see whether we could train a machine learning algorithm to predict, if we have a drug and it has these properties, what polymer should we mix it with to give us the best chance of an extrudable and printable filament. That is essentially what we did. And so, next slide, please. That led us to publish this paper. Medicine is the name of our machine learning program. It's a cunning play on the word medicine, and it is meant to say the machine learning program is seeing how the medicine is working. Clever that. Next slide, please. So you can, if you download that paper, there's a link and you can actually use our machine learning algorithm. It's available online. You can register and you can put in your formulation and it will tell you whether it thinks it prints or not. But we tested it with our data. So we had 614 different formulations that the students had made and tried to print. 3/4 of the data we used to train the machine learning algorithm. That means we're not asking it to interrogate those data. We're just putting those data into the machine learning algorithm and saying, okay, this combination printed. This combination didn't print. So 75% of the formulations train the model. And then we used the model to analyze the remaining 25% of the formulations and ask it, do you think this will print or not? And it, right off the bat, it got it right 76% of the time, which is not too bad, in my opinion. 3/4 of the time, the model predicted correctly whether that formulation would print or not. Next slide, please. Then One of the beauties of working for University College London is we get some absolutely amazing students coming and working with us. And so JJ came to do a PhD. And so he said, not unreasonably, the machine learning algorithm has been trained only with formulations that we have developed in our own lab. And so that can introduce a bias in how we choose to extrude, what materials our extruder can deal with, what polymers we happen to have in the lab. There's all sorts of reasons why our own data are biased. And so he said, well, shouldn't we train the model with formulations from other researchers around the world? And that's exactly what he did. This is what this paper is about. So next slide, please. He went into the literature and he found 1,600 formulations, that is extruded filament formulations, where people had tried to print them. And so what he did was, same deal, 75% of those formulations were fed into the model to train it. And then it was used to test the remaining 25% of the formulations that we had found. And now the accuracy of prediction increased to 84%, okay? Which is an important thing. It's coming back to this inherent bias. When you only train a model with your own data, you really need to bring in other people's data because everybody does things differently. Also, what he found was, in the literature, we only publish positive results. And really, to train these models properly, you need to throw everything in there, good and bad. It's not helping the model if it's only seeing positive outcomes. Okay, so we have this model. It's up to 84% accuracy, which is pretty good. But really, it would help a lot if people put it out there into the world, stuff that didn't work as well as stuff that did. So that's one. Next slide, please. The other area I want to touch on just briefly is how we might use artificial intelligence to help us interpret data. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach here. So I'm going to show you when we develop a 3D printed formulation, I'm going to show you some of the sorts of data that we would generate once we characterize the formulation. And then I'm going to show you how artificial intelligence helps us interpret all of those data together. Okay. So I'm going to do that with SLS printing. So that's selective laser sintering. So in this particular type of printing, you have a powder bed. So the raw feedstock is just a pharmaceutical powder, same as if you were going to compress a tablet, but you're just not compressing it. The powder is put out onto the bed of the printer. And in order to get the powder to stick together, a laser is shone over that powder, and the laser is very high power. So as the laser goes over each particle, the temperature of that particle goes up. So two particles next to each other, which are separate, as the laser goes over, they both melt slightly and then they fuse together. And so the object becomes solid. So to make a tablet, same deal as before, every layer is a circle, isn't it? The laser just goes across in a circle, fusing those powder particles together, and then more powder is laid out, laser again, and we build up the object layer by layer. Okay. Because we are relatively cheap at the university, we can't afford fancy SLS systems with lasers that you can tune to different wavelengths. So we have a printer, still quite expensive, but it's a fixed wavelength printer. And so that means we can only print certain types of materials. And in the main, we have to add a dye to our powder blend to get it to interact with the laser. So some of the tablets look a bit yellow, and that's why there's a dye. Next slide, please. So typically, these are the sorts of data that we would generate. I won't talk about them in great detail because that's what the AI system is going to do. I'm just going to show you the sorts of data that we feed in. So on the left of the screen is the original CAD drawing of what it is we're trying to print. On the right, you can see some images of the printed tablets, and they look yellow because they have this dye added to them to make them interact with the laser. Next slide, please. I do a lot of thermal analysis. By training, I am a thermal analyst, and so the lab is full of all sorts of thermal kit. So we would typically record, say, TGA, which is thermogravimetric analysis. That's the mass of a sample as you heat it in temperature. That's the data on the left. We would also use DSC. That's how much power it takes to heat a sample across a temperature range. That's the data on the right. I think you can see that the DSC data in particular, there's quite a lot going on in those powders that we need to try and understand. Next slide, please. We would also typically use FTIR and X-ray diffraction to try and understand what sort of interactions on a molecular level are going on in our sample. FTIR tells you about how drugs and polymers are chemically interacting. Powder X-ray diffraction is telling you what the crystalline structure of your material is. Next slide, please. With any type of printer, you can also change the printing parameters. There's a huge number, but if you imagine for this laser scanning, you can change the speed at which the laser goes across the powder, and hope you can see that if the laser moved very quickly, the temperature rise in the powder is going to be lower, and if the laser moves very slowly, the temperature rise will be greater because the laser is sitting over a particular particle for longer, and that will mean as you scan the laser more slowly, the density of your tablet will get harder because it's melted more, essentially. So these data show you mechanical strength of the tablet on the left as a function of laser scanning speed. And then typically we might use some sort of fancy technology, at least for publishing purposes. So in this instance, micro CT imaging, and that allows us to see the internal structure of these tablets after printing. Those are the images on the right. Next slide, please. No talk in pharmaceutics is complete without dissolution data. So we'd also do dissolution testing. So in this instance, it's showing you the dissolution rate as a function of how the laser speed of when the tablet was manufactured. So as I said before, slower laser speed, greater density of tablet, slower drug release. So those are the data on the screen. Right. So that's the sort of data that we need to interrogate. So next slide, please. This is the sort of thing that we want to understand. How can AI be used to help us interpret things better? Now, 2 years ago, a friend of mine at the University of Cambridge runs a big conference every year on printing. And he said, Simon, come and talk to us about printing and machine learning and artificial intelligence. And can you be controversial? Because I'd like to create a discussion. So I said, I can do that. And so these are the data that I presented. And the reason they're controversial is this. I can tell you that nothing on the screen that you're looking at right now is real. We didn't record any of those data. Everything that's on that screen in front of you right now was generated by ChatGPT. Okay? So we took ChatGPT. We said, we want you to make a tablet containing a drug made with PLGA, and we want you to make it with SLS printing. Can you create an image of what that would look like in CAD software? That's top left. Then we said, can you create a photograph of what the tablets would look like? That's the photograph of the tablets. That photograph is not real. That's generated by ChatGPT. Then we said, and I think you might imagine where I'm going here, what would it look like if you characterize these materials with TGA? What would it look like if you did FTIR? Even those micro CT images, not real, all generated by ChatGPT. Okay? Then what we did is we said to ChatGPT, okay, what I'd like you to do is write up these data as a publication-ready manuscript. So, next slide, please. This is what it did. It produced a 17-page Word document, which, to save you from utter boredom, I haven't put all 17 pages on. I've just put the first page. It produced a 17-page document, and in that document, it had background, materials and methods. It had interpretation of the results. It had the results that I've just shown you, and it had a summary. The only thing that it didn't do was have references, but it had everything else. And I suppose my question to you, and there's a lot of you on this call, so I'm not expecting you to actually answer, but rhetorically, the question would be, how long do you think it took from us sitting down and telling ChatGPT, can you create a tablet made with SLS printing, to it producing a 17-page document that was ready for publication? How long do you think that took? And I'll tell you, 45 minutes. It took 45 minutes to get this publication-ready manuscript. Okay, we were a bit shocked by this. That's fine. Then what I did is I thought, the whole of the scientific world is on publication and peer review. And so since the editor of International Journal of Pharmaceutics is a friend of mine, kind of hoping he's not on this call, I wrote to him and said, this is what we've done. ChatGPT has created this paper. None of it's real, but I'd like to see whether a peer review process would pick that out. So would it be okay if I submitted it to IJP and we sent it out for review? And he wrote back saying, that's a very interesting question. Let me get back to you. And so I didn't hear from him for a few days. And then I got an email about 3 days later, and he said, really sorry, this question has gone all the way to the top of Elsevier and back down again. And the answer is no. So they didn't actually let me send the paper out for peer review. But next slide, please. What they did do is they allowed me to write a commentary about our experience of using ChatGPT in generating research. And the paper that ChatGPT produced, including all the data that I've just shown you, is available as supplementary information to the paper that's on the screen at the moment. So if you feel like it later on, download that paper, and it just talks about our experience and shock actually of how good ChatGPT was in helping us generate scientific research. I need to be clear at this point. I'm not doing this because I am trying to cheat the scientific community or get out of getting into the lab and generating research. I did it for shock value because I wanted to know how good ChatGPT was, and actually it's scarily good. But also it's got some interesting elements there. It really could get involved in interpreting data. It really could get involved in designing products, and that's really the whole point of this talk. Next slide, please. Now, this is important. I work for University College London, and we have some amazing students. And we set them coursework tasks. And I've noticed that the quality of the coursework tasks has been getting a lot better recently. And that's because the students are using AI to help them write things. And I'm not saying that we're not going to encourage that or we ask them not to. They just need to use it as an aid to their learning, not to replace their learning, if that makes any sense. So there's a number of papers that have been published recently where people are starting to talk about these issues. How should we be using AI when we are helping as an aid to help us publish stuff? So the paper that's on the screen at the moment in ACS Nano is a really good example of a discussion paper that should allow you to integrate AI into your normal practice, but not take over. So not doing anything amoral. It's just helping you to write stuff. So that's a really good paper. Next slide, please. I love LinkedIn. If anyone wants to contact me through LinkedIn later, please do so. But LinkedIn is fantastic for bringing up examples of things that I find really useful. And in this instance, I found a number of papers on LinkedIn which have actually been published, but where the authors have used ChatGPT to help them write a paper in a very negative way. So this paper, which is published by Elsevier, I think you can see, it's on three-dimensional porous mesh structure of copper-based metal organic frameworks. That's fine. Next slide, please. This is the opening line of the introduction of this paper. Certainly, here is a possible introduction for your topic. Lithium metal batteries are promising candidates, blah, blah, blah. If you're going to use ChatGPT to help you in writing your paper, you do need to take the prompts out. So this is a really good example of how you should not be using ChatGPT in helping you write scientifically. Next slide, please. It should come as no surprise, therefore. I have another example. So this is Elsevier. I'm not having a go at Elsevier. They're just the two examples that I found. So this is about veins and hepatic artery injuries. It's a surgical report. Okay. Next slide, please. This is the summary from this actual published paper. In summary, the management of bilateral iatrogenic. I'm very sorry, but I don't have access to real-time information or patient-specific data as I'm an AI language model. You do need to proofread really carefully what you're submitting when you're publishing stuff. I'm not quite sure what the proofreaders of this paper were doing either, but this is an example again of things you should not be doing with ChatGPT. Right. Next slide, please. What does this mean? It's not all doom and gloom. And I brought this talk in exactly on schedule as well, which is a miracle. It means that AI and machine learning have got huge application for healthcare and medicine's development in particular. All the models require data input in order to make a decision. And the one key thing that I want to get across in this talk is when I presented these data at Cambridge a few years ago, someone in the audience put their hand up and they said, in the art world, there's lots of AI images. And originally, you could ask AI, make a picture of me in the style of Monet, and it would look amazing. And the reason is because the AI system is going to the internet, it's looking for connections between things, it's drawing conclusions, and then it's creating something. And that works when all the information that it's accessing is real. As AI generates more and more images in this instance, more and more of the images on the internet are not real. And then you get this gradual loss in the ability of the AI system to generate something sensible, because now it's drawing from an information pool which contains a mixture of real and artificially generated images. And the same is a risk here for the pharmaceutical world. And I think right now, before people start going crazy with this, every bit of data which is generated in some way by AI needs to be labeled as such, because that will stop it being fed into future iterations of an AI software. Okay, it's super important that. Right, next slide, please. I've said that already. Next slide, please. I can't finish without a quick mention of my YouTube channel. I've talked at conferences all over the world. The largest audience I've ever talked to had 750 people in. So this presentation is actually the largest audience I've ever presented to, which is absolutely tremendous. And I'm looking on the side on the chat. I can see that you're all over the world, which is absolutely amazing. So the outreach here from FIP has been absolutely incredible. So that's really good. My aim with the YouTube channel is to help students that want to understand basic science concepts. So there's nothing fancy on my YouTube channel. It's just basic science, simply put. Okay, so if you go to YouTube and you type pharma drama, there's about just over 100 at the moment videos, not very long, 8 to 10 minutes each. And they just look at simple underlying concepts. And so if you want to look at them, or if you're a teacher and you want to direct your students towards that resource, it's all free. That would be absolutely fantastic. If anyone ever has ideas for videos that they'd like me to put out, send me an email, message me through YouTube, and I can totally do that. And then last slide, please. I can't take all the credit for doing all this stuff. Abdul is an absolutely huge figure in my life. And so we do a lot of this stuff together at the School of Pharmacy. Mo is a former postdoc of mine that was working on a project with Cambridge, and he did most of the AI stuff. He's so good. He's just been offered a lectureship by Queen Mary, so he's actually disappeared to Queen Mary, but he's doing great, which is fantastic. And Hang Zhang is a current PhD student who's just unbelievably clever, and he's just finishing his PhD. But without those people, it would not have been possible to do all of this. So I just want to say thank you to that, to those. Right, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Geisfert, for your super interesting presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Anna Worsley, the Director of Innovation at FabRx since 2021, and was more recently appointed the CEO of the Spanish subsidiary FabRx AI in January 2024. She completed her PhD in biomaterials for diabetic chronic wounds at the Royal Veterinary College and University College London in 2020, following her master's in nanotechnology and regenerative medicine from UCL and her bachelor in anatomy and human biology from the University of Liverpool. I would like to invite you to give your presentation.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed the past two presentations as well. Very, very interesting. So next slide, please. So I'm talking today about software in pharmaceutical 3D printing, but you can't really do that without talking about the whole cycle. And we call this the virtuous cycle of personalized medicine. So I'll walk us through the cycle and then go into the more detailed aspects. So this starts with the diagnostic testing, and Simon already touched upon this in terms of the wearable devices, so your smartwatches, smartphones, etc. And then there's also genetic testing that has now started around the world, all very exciting, and making sure that the patient can get that prescription that they actually need. And now that now gets fed into the digital prescription, and most areas of the world now are digitalizing this. It's on an e-platform, various softwares in each country, which means it's very easy for us to feed that into software for pharmaceutical 3D printing. And we've actually done this for some hospitals in Spain already, connecting them, meaning that the 3D printer is automatically loaded with the prescription required. And then finally, you do move into the pharmaceutical 3D printing aspects, the actual 3D digital design, 3D printing using the pharmaceutical 3D printer, followed by the actual development and administration. And obviously for a pharmaceutical 3D printer, it needs to be GMP. There's lots of different aspects that make it a pharmaceutical 3D printer over a regular printer, but software does play a very important part in that. Next slide, please. And these are the different aspects that I'll be talking to you today about regarding the implementation of the software and how we're doing it in FabRx. So I'll start at the top and move my way around as the presentation goes along. Next slide, please. So to start with, dosing. So FabRx AI have been developing Dose Tailor, which is a personalized dose prediction software. We're using tacrolimus as a model drug for this, for the initial development. And this is because it's a low therapeutic index drug, meaning that you need to get that exact dose, otherwise it's detrimental for the patients. So this is actually an immunosuppressant for organ transplants. So you don't want to get a too high dose because then you have issues with your immune system. And you don't want to get a too low dose because then you can have organ rejection. So very important you get that correct. And at the moment, the way they do that is they bring the patients in very regularly into the hospital or local healthcare site to take blood tests. And that's obviously not very pleasant for the patient. Not only do they have to travel into the hospital, but they're getting their bloods taken all the time. Very unpleasant indeed, reducing well-being in general. And so we want to improve this and reduce the amount of times they need to come into the healthcare facility for those blood tests. And so we're doing that by developing this AI. So we fed in huge amounts of data regarding the patients on this drug, and then fed it through the AI system to be able to predict that dose that they need. And at the moment, we're able to reduce that the time for that you reach that target dose, the best dose for that patient substantially. And in the future, we're hoping that we reduce it completely. And so that initial dose that we predict is the dose required by the patients. That will, like I said, improve well-being of the patient, reduce morbidity, mortality, etc. So this is being developed at the moment. Next slide, please. So next, I will be moving away from the dosing and into the kind of 3D printing aspects, which is the main subject of this presentation. Next, please. So I'll just go over some of the kind of benefits and details of pharmaceutical 3D printing. The other presentations did touch upon this, so I won't go into too much detail. But essentially, the main point of call is the automation of compounding. So as you can see in the video being shown, you can, instead of crushing tablets, weighing out powders, filling capsules by hand, you can automate that process with blister filling, automatic blister filling, or capsule filling, taking away that job from the pharmacist, and not only reducing the risks of overdosing and underdosing for the patient, but you're also improving the safety of the pharmacist and reducing the amount of work that they have to do, allowing them to focus on other aspects in the pharmacy. Oh, next slide, please. Then we go into increased personalization options. So one thing that's really important to know about compounding is that it does have reduced treatment adherence. And actually 35% of non-treatment adherence in pediatric patients is directly linked to the final dosage form. So whether it's large capsules or taking multiple to reach that target dose. And so we want to improve that because there's no point prescribing medication to a patient who's not actually going to take it. So you can do this with different colors and different flavors, making sure that dose is in a single tablet, making it chewable, for example, if they're struggling to swallow. And that's all aiming towards improving the treatment adherence rate. And these processes can be improved by software, making it making it easier for the pharmacist to choose the different formulations, to making sure that the safety is involved for the automatic compounding. Next, please. Pharmaceutical 3D printing is also seen as a more environmentally friendly approach. Not only that you're reducing waste because it's encouraging personalized medicine, but it's also decentralized, as some of my colleagues were mentioning earlier. Next slide, please. And then finally, it's set to improve the efficiency of clinical trial batch manufacture. We're actually collaborating with some large pharmaceutical companies at the moment on this front, which is very exciting. Essentially, instead of making large batches or hand producing these batches for clinical studies, you can automatically do it with the printer, reducing the risks of errors in the manufacturing process and kind of the Chinese whispers effect of sending protocols internationally if your development site is in one location and your actual production and testing is in another. And then you can very quickly change that formulation and create another batch very quickly if necessary. Next slide, please. So there's lots of different pharmaceutical 3D printing technologies that you can use for pharmacy. So fused deposition modeling, Simon's already mentioned this in detail, so I won't go into it too much. But essentially, this is with a filament. Semi-solid extrusion is using a paste or a gel, and this is the technique that is more readily used for blister or capsule filling, as mentioned earlier. There's also direct powder extrusion, which is essentially a mini hot melt extruder, skipping that filament manufacturing step required for FDM. And then we've also developed a pellet dispenser. And although that's not 3D printing, it uses the 3D printer as a device to be able to do that. And the software is what enables it. And to be able to control all these different technologies, they're all very different. And so you need software to automate it, to kind of demystify it and encourage uptake for pharmacies and pharmacists who are often very busy. They often don't have time to learn complex technologies or implement new things in the lab, in the pharmacy. And so they need something simple, something more easy to understand. And that's where the software comes into play. Next, please. So I'll talk about the actual software for the formulation development and moving forward now. Next slide, please. So Simon actually already talked about this because we FabRx did collaborate on this project. But basically, just to go over it very quickly, medicine.com is available for free right now. So I encourage you to go on it to help you develop your formulations for FDM 3D printing, like Simon was mentioning. Basically, our aim with software development in FabRx AI is to demystify and automate the process and all the workflow flows, speeding it up and reducing the resources required. Because you could very easily spend a lot of time and a lot of money developing an FDM formulation to make it work. And so AI is really useful to speed that up, churn out those formulations faster and skip the ones that don't work. Next, please. And this is just a quick slide going over that in more detail with a video showing the actual website that you could go onto now. And as you can see, it can predict many things from the different 3D printing parameters that you need to 3D print, so temperature, speed, etc., but also going into the dissolution. Next slide, please. Oh, next again, please. So I'll talk about some of the history of FabRx now and the field. So the field itself started coming about for personalized medicine and automated compounding in the early 2010s, and FabRx was founded in 2014. Next, please. In 2018, FabRx carried out the world's first clinical study for pharmaceutical 3D printing for personalized medicine, and this was in a hospital in Spain. So we put the printer in the hospital pharmacy to print these formulations, and it was for a rare metabolic disorder, maple syrup urine disease in pediatric patients. And so the treatment was isoleucine, and this was personalized and compounded into quite large capsules, which were hand-filled. These are very difficult for the patients to swallow. So their parents and carers would split open the capsule, sprinkle it into their food, or mix it into their drink. And that was very unpalatable. And so the patients ended up just not taking it. And like I said, there's no point prescribing a medication if they're not going to take it. So FabRx came along and developed chewable flavored gummies with different doses corresponding to the different sizes of the tablets that were automatically printed. And this was overall a very successful study. So not only did the patients want to stay on the medication afterwards, allowing us to continue the project into a longer study with actual polypills with different treatments incorporated into one tablet, but it also improved the bioavailability of the medication itself. And that's probably because the patients were actually taking the medication as prescribed rather than manipulating it, affecting the intake. Next, please. So off the back of that successful study, we were able to get a grant to develop the world's first pharmaceutical 3D printer for personalized medicine. And that was the MediMaker 1 that was launched in 2020, which was a very exciting time. We won a number of awards, and we were able to spark a number of clinical collaborations across the world. Next slide, please. So so we were able to launch our second printer as well, which I showed an image earlier, with the different print heads for automated polypill manufacture. And we were able to develop our MediMaker Studio software to control the printers, which I'll talk to you about in more detail in a few slides' time. FabRx AI was founded in 2023 to focus on this software development. And last year, we were able to start moving into the United States as well with FabRx US. Next slide, please. And these are just some of our non-confidential collaborations that we've been able to do over the past few years. So as you can see, there's all sorts of organizations there, from big hospitals to small hospitals, small pharmacies, big pharmacies, international pharmaceutical companies, universities, you name it, we collaborate with everyone. So if you do want to collaborate with us, please let us know. We're very keen to get involved. And actually, it's a group there that I do want to highlight is the Pharma 3D PI. So this is the world's first international organization bringing together stakeholders in this field to discuss ideas, to initiate collaborations, and to talk to regulatory bodies. So I encourage you to go on their website and sign up, and they actually have a webinar later in the spring this year. So yes, fully encourage you to sign up to that one. Next slide, please. And this is MediMaker Studio, as I was mentioning. So one thing that we noticed when we were when FabRx was first entering the space, was that we were using open source software, which is very complex, lots of different parameters to edit, and that might well be very usable, earlier on in the field and by more technology-minded academics. It's not good for pharmacists, and that's why we developed MediMaker Studio to simplify the process, demystify it, and encourage uptake of pharmaceutical 3D printing as a whole. So there's two different modes in this software. So there's R&D mode, which is essentially a digital lab book. And as I was speaking earlier, and Simon touched upon, when you're developing protocols and formulations, it is a heavy trial and error process sometimes. I mean, sometimes you can develop a formulation very quickly. I've heard of some people developing it in a few hours, which is very exciting, but sometimes it does take a long time. And that's why having a digital lab book where it automatically saves all of the different changes that you did for that protocol is really useful. And then when you've got that final protocol that you've developed and you validated it with all the analytical experiments required in line with compounding regulation, you can then lock it and have it accessible through the clinical mode. And with the clinical mode, it means that pharmacists who are not doing R&D can 3D print for their patient prescriptions without altering the actual protocol itself, improving the safety of the 3D printing process, because you can't change it from what was tested in the analytical experiments, but also it means that it's more automated for the pharmacists themselves, and they don't have to worry about changing parameters, etc. It's all done for them automatically. And then along those lines as well, you have library access to different excipients, different drugs from companies from around the world. We have protocol sharing, either publicly to allow knowledge sharing, so irrelevant of where you are in the world, but also privately, for example, for clinical studies. So when I mentioned clinical studies earlier, with the development lab, sometimes in a different geographical location to the actual preparation and testing facilities where the patients are. The old standard way would be emailing the protocol across. Well, with our software, you can have it automatically shared and be uneditable to improve the safety and reliability of the experiments being carried out. And then we also have inbuilt quality control that we have developed alongside the hardware that we've implemented in the printer, and auto auditing for when you're using it with patients. Next slide, please. So I've got two examples now to go through in two different slides about some of the clinical work we've been doing with some of our collaborators. And I probably mentioned these guys a lot when talking to people around the world, but Gustaf Roussy, we're their biggest fans. They've actually got two MediMaker 3D printers at the moment, and they're planning on buying a third probably at the end of this year or next year to boost their 3D printing capabilities. And not only are they printing for patients right now as part of regular compounding regulation, they are also pioneering really innovative projects like this one. This project that they're carrying out is the world's largest. It's for breast cancer, and they are combining an anti-breast cancer drug with an anti-side effect drug. Because what they were finding is that their breast cancer patients were not taking their side effect medication because there's just too many pills to take, but then that would give them side effects from the breast cancer medication, and they would just stop taking the breast cancer medication. And so you can see that that's a negative feedback loop. And so they want to improve that by giving it as a polypill instead, with that personalized dose to improve the treatment further. And they're actually combining our semi-solid extrusion technology with our pellet dispensing technology. So they developed the semi-solid extruding paste formulation, and the pellet dispenser is dispensing pre-manufactured commercialized pellets that they've purchased, increasing the safety of the process. And like I said, they're using compounding regulation to carry this out. Next slide, please. And then more recently, we've been working with a community compounding pharmacy in Spain, Farmacia Orive. And this is actually a publication which is in pre-proof now, preprint, and hopefully very soon it'll be officially published and the full PDF will be available online. So we're very excited by that. And it's with the implementation of the MediMaker 1 3D printer in a community compounding pharmacy for the first time in the world. This is using minoxidil for hair loss as the model drug. And this was actually mixed in with two different formulations. So we were evaluating two formulations as part of this project. The first formulation was EU targeted, and this is a very simple formulation of just PEG and xanthan gum. So it's very simple to prepare, simple mixing protocol, and then to use to fill capsules. And then in the US, they use bases quite readily in their compounding practices. So we used Specialized RX's Techna base as the second formulation for our kind of US collaborators and people in that market to see how applicable it is there. These were very successful, both for capsule filling, and we actually measured a 20% faster preparation rate overall versus doing it manually, and a 50% reduction in manual labor. And so you can really see how that means the pharmacist can go on and be freed up and go on to do other protocols and prepare medication for other patients, or spend more time with the patients themselves, improving healthcare overall. And then we also recorded up to 40% cost reductions per capsule as well, so reducing healthcare costs all around. So we're very excited by the study, and like I said, it's been published. It's been published now, accepted, and so the final copy will be available online very soon. Next, please. And thank you very much. So that's the end of my presentation. I do want to plug in FabRx's webinar now, because I'm hoping some of you will sign up to that. So that's actually next week. So you can sign up on our website or through our LinkedIn page. And we've actually got Maxime Arnoux from Gustaf Roussy and Celia from the pharmacy in Spain talking about these projects in more detail and from their point of view as well, rather than the FabRx point of view. So if you want to hear more about those studies, I encourage you to sign up to that webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Worsley, for your fascinating and informative presentation. Now it's time to address questions. I would like to hand it over to Aisu, who will review the questions and share them with our speakers.
Thank you, Fereshteh. So again, I would like to thank our speakers, Prof. Simon and Dr. Anna, for their insightful webinars. And we have more than 1,000 participants, so in Zoom and also on YouTube. So that is also great news. And also I would like to thank all the participants for their interest for this webinar. So because of the time, I will ask one question to each speaker. So maybe we can start with Prof. Simon. So there is a question, so I will read it. For 3D printing to be effective in pharmacy setting, issues surrounding supply chain management must be addressed. Pharmacists would need to stock wide variety of raw materials for printing and distributing 3D printed medications in a way that preserves their integrity could be challenging. And how these challenges being solved, and with this perspective, is 3D printing something for every pharmacy? Would you be able to share your thoughts on this? Thank you.
That is a very good question. So when I was part of FabRx, we went to the MHRA, which is the UK's body for regulating medicines. And we asked them exactly that question because it's very important. How do you retain control of the supply line and make sure that everybody is printing the right stuff? And you'll be pleased to know I don't know what the answer is. But we did at least start a dialogue with the MHRA. And there's a number of things that you can do. Anna would know better because I'm no longer with the company, but you can add software things. You can add QR codes onto things. You can have remote keys to allow the printer to be used once someone's verified what you're printing. So there's a number of technological approaches that you might take. There are two other issues which are super important and related to this. One is that at the moment, imagine that you had a product on sale and you had it in discrete doses, for argument's sake, 10 mgs, 20 mgs, and 50 mgs. You would have to do clinical trials for bioavailability for those three dosage forms and submit that to the regulator. How do you get approval from a regulator to sell a dose range? So Fereshteh mentioned Sprytam. So Sprytam is in 4 doses. It's 3D printed, but it's only 4 doses. And so that's a tricky one. You know, how can you make a product which potentially have any dose and deal with that? And the answer from the regulator, at least at that point, was bracketing. So you would do some bioavailability in the lowest dose, the highest dose, and some in the middle. And they seem to be okay with the idea of allowing you then to operate within that space. That's the second point. And the third point is it really makes a difference as to whether the regulator considers that a 3D printer in a pharmacy, when the pharmacist prints a medication, it makes a huge difference as to whether the regulator considers that manufacturing, or if you're American, compounding, or if you're British, extemporaneous manufacture. But it makes a real difference. If the regulator considers it to be manufacturing, then the question asker is absolutely right. The whole process from that supply chain, the materials getting to the pharmacy, how the pharmacist is using it, yeah, that's all going to come under the regulator. If they consider it to be a compounding step, I think it'll be a lot easier. The feedstocks for the material for the printers, which are usually gels or polymers, can be made under GMP, and they can be supplied to the pharmacy, and then the pharmacist is compounding to make the final formulation. So a lot of the answer to that question comes down to the regulator.
So I can add to that as well. So for the projects that we're doing and with the pharmacies who are using it under, like for patients right now, they're doing it under compounding regulation. And then when this field grows, as this field grows, there will be needing we will be needing new legislation to help with the regulatory adherence and auditing process to ensure safety. And actually, the leading regulatory authorities are designing this hub and spoke network for that, with control sites being the contact for the regulatory bodies, and then they will look after the different spoke sites, which wouldn't necessarily need a manufacturing license, so they would do it under compounding regulation still. This is actually becoming live this summer in the UK, which is very exciting. With the UK being the pioneers, we're expecting it to become live in the EU and the US very shortly as well. Following that, as we have been told that they're all talking to each other, which is very exciting. And something that we do to help with safety as well is that we like to work with the excipients and the supply chains that the pharmacies are already using. So we're not using any fancy pharma inks or fancy excipients for 3D printing. We're using what the pharmacist already uses and what they already have in their pharmacies. And that's why for the pharmacy project that we did recently with minoxidil, we had a EU favored formulation, which was a simple PEG formulation, and then a US targeted formulation, which was the Technobase, because that's what they're used to using in the US.
Thank you both for your comments. Also, I will ask a question about the regulations of 3D printing. So, do you know any countries who already have the 3D printing is regulated, or would you be able to recommend any specific guidelines for 3D printing? And also, is there any specific medication that is under trial or on the market that is produced by 3D printing? So how do you see the feature of the 3D printing? Maybe we can start with Anna first, and if any comments from Simon or Fereshteh will be welcome. Thank you.
Yep. So like I was saying before, we are using compounding regulation. Obviously, Simon was mentioning how there's different names in every country, but it's all very similar regulation essentially. And that's what we use to target what to use in these pharmacies. For the more complex products like polypills, for example, that doesn't necessarily fit straight away under compounding regulation. And that's why larger hospitals like Gustave Roussy are doing these clinical studies, clinical trials to test these different projects. In terms of the drugs, obviously, like I mentioned in the presentation, we are testing different drugs like minoxidil, tacrolimus, etc. However, you don't need you can, under compounding regulation, you can just print for patients. And these hospitals like Gustave Roussy, there are some pharmacies in Spain as well, printing for their patients right now. They're not advertising what drugs they're printing. They're not publishing it because it's under compounding regulation. So it's part of their standard pharmacy workflows.
Yeah, and I also want to add about which countries or regions have regulated 3D printing. So the United States, FDA, and the European Union has established guidelines for 3D printing in pharmacy, focusing on safety, quality, and efficacy. Both have approved certain 3D printed medications with clear regulations on manufacturing processes and quality control. Other countries, such as Canada and Japan, are also developing frameworks for regulating 3D printed drugs.
And I was also going to say that I know that the FDA has a 3D printing lab, for instance. And so I was just going to make one general point here, which is if you're applying to a regulator for permission to sell a product, okay, there are guidelines, but each product is different. And so the way that process works actually is it's a negotiation between you and the regulator. And so you're going to go to the regulator and say, this is my product, and I would like permission to sell it. Thank you very much. And they're going to ask questions in return, and you're going to answer those questions. So you're going to go, I want to be able to provide this dosage with this degree of error. And it's a backwards and forwards conversation. So in that sense, there's nothing to stop you going to a regulator at the moment with a 3D printed product and asking questions. And the reason the regulators are nervous is because they don't know what questions to ask, because they don't have a lot of experience with printing. So when we went to the MHRA with FabRx, the reason the MHRA was very open to having that conversation is because they themselves need to understand 3D printing and what questions to ask. And the FDA has set up this 3D printing lab so that their own staff can understand how printing works and the types of questions that need to be asked.
Okay, thank you for your answers. Because of the time, we will move to the closing. So, Ferishteh,
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Aysu. So as we come to the close of today's webinar, I think we can all agree on one thing: healthcare is undergoing a major transformation. 3D drug printing combined with AI and machine learning is changing how we develop, deliver, and personalize medicine. Key insights from today: personalized medicine is the future. 3D printing allows for tailored treatments, improving outcomes, especially for complex conditions. AI and machine learning enhance efficiency in drug development and manufacturing. And we also need a collaboration between pharmaceuticals, technology, and healthcare to drive these innovations forward. Most importantly, innovation should always focus on improving patient care. As we move forward, we should ensure technology serves people, making medicine more accessible, effective, and personalized. I would like to especially thank our speakers for their valuable presentation, and also thank all the participants who took part in this webinar. I hope you enjoyed the topics and learned more about 3D drug printing technology. Next slide, please. I would like to warmly invite you all to register for the 83rd FIP World Congress of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, which will take place in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2025. Next slide, please. The Congress will feature 3 exciting subthemes as shown on previous slide. Making it sustainable, making the system work, and making it personal. Please note that abstract submission are open until the 17th of March, while the early registration deadline is the 2nd of July, followed by the second registration deadline on the 11th of August. So for more detailed information about the Congress, you can see the FIP website. Additionally, you can explore upcoming FIP digital events on the events section of the FIP website. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Goodbye.